Hi, I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we have our NFL Week 2 recap. Another great week, of course, of NFL football. Not near as exciting as Week 1, surely just because it wasn't Week 1 of NFL football. But still some great games that we will get to in just a moment. But first, the sad part of the week, the injury list. We got a couple of injuries here, a couple of season-ending injuries for big-name players. Starting off with new Lions safety, CJ Gardner-Johnson. It's looking like he's going to miss the entirety of his season with a torn pec muscle. There is a chance that he comes back towards the end, but it's pretty low, and they would have to make the playoffs for there to be any chance, really. So it's pretty much a season ender there. Next up, Giants running back Saquon Barkley is going to miss at least a couple of weeks here and is right now listed as week to week with a pretty gnarly ankle sprain, which he suffered this week. Next up, we have Panthers linebacker Shaq Thompson, who is another season-ending injury, this time with a broken fibula, which is ironically rare to see a broken bone in the NFL, especially considering all the torn muscles you see, but he is out for the season with a broken bone. And then finally, probably most sadly and definitely most gruesomely, if you watched the game or have seen any of the replays or pictures, Nick Chubb is out for the season with pretty much a missing knee. Just to kind of give you a visual without showing how nasty it was, his knee bent 90 degrees in the way that it's not supposed to bend 90 degrees. It went to the side. It was nasty. It was really bad. It's a huge bummer for Nick Chubb and the Browns. Hopefully everyone on this list has a speedy recovery. And now we will jump into our recap. I almost said predictions, just getting a little bit ahead of myself. Starting off with the first recap of the Minnesota Vikings in the Thursday night football game, in which Minnesota went to Philadelphia and lost in a weirdly close game by a score of 28-34. Why I say weirdly close game is because this thing was a shit show from start to finish. The Minnesota Vikings had four fumbles lost in the first half. In the first half. The Eagles had an interception in the first half, and I believe they had a second turnover in the second half. I just can't remember exactly what it was. So just absolute insanity. It looked like no one there really wanted to play. It was the definition of sloppy NFL football, which is early in the season is becoming a normal for the Minnesota Vikings, which I do not like.
Unfortunately for them.
But the moral of this whole story is I'm still not that nervous. I mean, if you look at the two teams we faced a now 2-0 and much more promising than people gave them credit for Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, in which we had 4 total turnovers in that game and only lost by 3. And then now we face last year's NFC Championships, the Philadelphia Eagles, in Philadelphia and have 4 turnovers in the game and only lose by 6. And we had a chance to win it there if we could have gotten an onside kick at the end. That's promising stuff because the reason we're losing these games is turnovers and not even interceptions, but more specifically fumbles, which account for 8 of our total 9 turnovers between 2 games. And coming from football and watching football my whole life, one of the, I don't want to say easy, but easier things to kind of tighten up on in the NFL is cutting down on fumbles. So if the Vikings cut down on fumbles and we cut it down to, weird to say, but even half and only have 4 fumbles between 2 games, we're probably 2-0 right now. So that's a really easy goal to hit and very attainable for the Minnesota Vikings. And not to mention our schedule gets a tad easier. We still got a couple of really good teams, but we also face a couple of crappy get-right teams in the next 4 or 5 weeks. So it's been a rough start to say the least, but I still do have a promising outlook on the Vikings this year.
Yeah, the Vikings, they tried to make it a game. You know, it was more of a blowout. At one point, it was 20-7,
something in that area,
something like that. But the Eagles were quite a bit ahead, and then the Vikings were able to come back and make it a 1-score game. And like you said, they had missed the onside kick where, hey, crazier things have happened for the Vikings. Who knows if it would have happened, but they missed that onside kick. I don't think anyone's recovered an onside kick yet this year, which is an interesting stat. It's probably fallen even lower for a completion percentage.
Pretty early, but yeah, I don't think anyone has yet.
Yeah, but I thought that Jordan Addison is really showing that he belongs in the NFL. He is one of the top receivers right now in fantasy points with over 15 receptions and 2 touchdowns in each game, or with totals in each game.
Yeah.
So I really like how he's playing. I think that's a bright spot for the Vikings to really look forward to.
Definitely. I want to say his stats on the year are a little over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns between the 2 games. So really good stuff for Jordan Addison. As for the Eagles, they didn't look terrible, but they sure didn't look that good either. So it'll be interesting to see how these 2 teams split off and go from this point in the year. Because last year, the Eagles looked really good and stayed really good, and the Vikings looked really bad and were able to kind of pick themselves back up at this point last year. So we'll see how it goes. But moving on, we're going to jump over to Green Bay, or should I say Atlanta, and look at Callan's game with the Green Bay Packers heading to Atlanta to take on the Falcons and winning in a nail-biter, losing in a nail-biter by a score of 24-25. The Falcons are able to pick up a win at home in an absolute amazing game. This very easily could have been the game of the week. Who would have thought the Falcons were going to start off 2-0 this year with Desmond Ridder? Something you always said last year about Ridder during the draft process and throughout the season is he doesn't have a lot of the tangibles. He doesn't have a lot of the arm talent, but he just finds a way to win. He's just one of those guys that are a winner. And I said, you're crazy. No way he does it in the NFL. But here we are. I know we're only 2 weeks in, but the Falcons are sitting at 2-0 in what is a shockingly competitive NFC South right now. Good on them, and it's really on the shoulders of Bijan Robinson right now, who's been absolutely balling out and tore the Packers up.
He's been a spark for them. And yeah, he really ran all over Green Bay, and that's one thing that really worries me is our rush defense got gashed for over 150 yards on the ground, and that's just not good. Hats off to the Falcons. They played a great game. They scored 13 unanswered points in the 4th quarter, which just shows that it's that Green Bay is having those growing pains that we were talking about, where even though they were ahead in the 4th quarter, it's a young team that has to learn how to win and learn how to close those games out. And as the season goes on, I believe that they will. Jordan Love did have a chance to at least get them in field goal range and just completely blew it. Not in a bad way. He was 0 for 4 in the 4th, 0 for 6 total in the 4th quarter, which just shows that he needs to kind of clutch it up a little bit. But I think that he will, and that'll come around, especially as he learns to figure it out in the NFL this year.
Yeah, especially outside of the 4th quarter, of course. Jordan Love did, I must say, continue to play pretty well. He looked decent. I want to say he added 2 more touchdowns to his total, if I'm not mistaken. 3, so he's got to be leading the NFL in touchdowns right now.
He's tied for the lead with 6 touchdown passes.
Almost irritating to say, but whatever. Okay, I guess. They're 1-1. At least they're not 2-0.
They're almost 2-0.
But yeah, I must say, Jordan Love does look good. That offense looks really good. It's just, can that defense step up and be what they were supposed to be and touted to be in the offseason?
Yeah, the defense. Shockingly, the defense is what's worrying me more than anything. Yeah. And the offense is kind of clicking and showing that it can score points. So if that defense is able to shore it up, which I thought would be the leader of this team with the more veteran leadership on the defensive side, it's more likely that it will at least turn around in favor of the defense. So
NFL Bizzaro world as usual. And then now, just as last week, and as we will do moving on, Cal and I are just going to talk about our personal game of the week that we picked. I'll start off with mine, which was the Washington Commanders heading to Denver to take on the Broncos. And the Commanders win by a score of 35-33. At one point at halftime in this game, or just before halftime rather, they were down 21-3. So they not only win the game, but they stage an 18-point comeback on the road behind a very solid performance by second-year quarterback Sam Howell, a guy that I've really been loving on this entire offseason. And he's not blowing people out the water by any means, but I didn't think he would. I just thought he would come out and be a good game manager. He would do what the Commanders needed him to do with that strong rushing game and a good defense backing him up. And he has done that and even a little more, I would say. He had a really sharp-looking 30-yard touchdown to Terry McLaurin late to kind of seal the game for the Commanders. And then the defense really stepped up in the second half and all but shut out the Denver Broncos. So it was just really good stuff as a team by the Washington Commanders. And Ron Rivera pretty well came into the season on the hot seat along with Sam Howell, start naming him as the starter. So it's really good to see Sam Howell do well and this whole team do well. And another shocking 2-0 team.
Yeah, and a shocking 0-2 team is the Denver Broncos, who actually, even though they blew the 21 or 18-point lead, had a chance to tie it with a Hail Mary completed from Russell Wilson to Brandon Johnson at the end of the game. But they needed the 2-point conversion and missed the 2-point conversion, which just goes to show that, you got to practice those 2-point plays. They're critical sometimes.
They say NFL is a game of inches, and they mean it. It's really what it comes down to. And then finally, Callan's game of the week this week was the technically most recent game to happen, just happening last night on Monday Night Football, with the Cleveland Browns heading to Pittsburgh to take on their division rival, the Steelers. But their road trip was spoiled. The Steelers pick up a win by a score of 26-22. As we already mentioned earlier, they lose Nick Chubb for the season, as well as losing this game. So really just a bad night overall for the Cleveland Browns. And even more specifically, a bad night for Deshaun Watson. He did not look very good. He is not looking like that big $260 million contract they just signed him to. Not only did he not play that well, he was weirdly penalized for a quarterback. I want to say he had two, if not three, different 15-yard penalties, two of them being face masks, personal fouls committed by a quarterback, which is much flukier than anything. I don't think that's going to by any means be a consistent thing for Deshaun Watson, but it was just kind of the cherry on top of a crap Sunday for Deshaun tonight because he didn't look that good, and then he had those on top of it. Flipping to the other side of the ball, though, the Pittsburgh Steelers looked much better after coming off that clobbering they got in San Francisco in Week 1. George Pickens, a guy who Cal and I have both been touting up this offseason, had a big 71-yard touchdown and then also had 3 other catches, which totaled up to 124 yards for him. So that was awesome to see, the Pickett to Pickens connection.
It's finally working.
We've been trying to learn how to say since the offseason without stuttering through it. But overall, a really good game, a good divisional matchup, and a good win for the Steelers.
Yeah, this was a really good win for the Pittsburgh defense, who had 2 total touchdowns, including a pick 6 on the very first play of the game, which is the first time that's happened since 2018 for a pick 6 to happen on the very first play from scrimmage. So that was interesting. And T.J. Watt is showing that he's a perennial Defensive Player of the Year candidate by being the 4th player ever with 4 sacks and a defensive touchdown. He had a fumble recovery for a touchdown also. That was their 2nd defensive touchdown. But he's the 4th player with 4 sacks and a defensive touchdown through the team's first 2 games in NFL history. So he's just on his way to being another Defensive Player of the Year award for him.
Yeah, not very surprising there. TJ Watt is a monster. If you do some math with that score, the Pittsburgh's defense put up 14 points, and they only had 26 total, meaning the defense quite literally outscored the offense in this game for Pittsburgh. They say defense wins games, and it was very much true in this case scenario. So that was our NFL Week 2 recap. Stay tuned in for tomorrow's episode where we talk about our Week 3 predictions. But until then, don't forget
to eat the W.